this is something we touch on a lot here on the show, but to your point of what we say here is everyone is doing the best they can considering their specific domestications and conditions. Which many people do not believe that, they have a lot of resistance towards that idea. But I think the only way I've found so far to release the judgment that I would hold on someone else and what they're doing with their life is to remember that if I was in their shoes, which means I had experienced all their domestications and conditioning, then I would be doing exactly what they're doing. There is not another option, really, because that is who they are. Yes, they have choices that present in front of themselves, but in a sense, they are creating their exact fate almost because of the conditioning that they are collectively made up of to this point. And then their future will be the conditioning that they decide to bring into their life one way or another there forward. And when we can understand that, the forgiveness and the understanding of the other person that comes with it is extremely healing. And I think it gets us back to remembering that that person is, God in one of his myriad of disguises. He is another one of us, if however you want to say that. He is us, or this other person is a mirror, showing us a piece of us that we would be in that circumstance too. And that means the white supremacist, that means the narcissistic personality disorder, abusive ex-boyfriend, that means all the people, the person who's dealing drugs on the side of the corner or whatever. It's a matter of figuring out, how do we allow people to come to that understanding without bashing them over the head with it, because that's where we see all this resistance. And I wanted to also bring up with you, just to get a little deeper into that, and because you brought up the statues of these Confederate generals, being knocked down all over right now, really just what your thoughts are on that, because I think this is a really interesting and very philosophical conversation that is not being had. It's like, who are you siding with? It's like, figure it out right now, and we're all scared to be on the wrong side. So what are your thoughts on that? How would you?
I mean, we can excavate this issue. So you start by toppling the Confederate generals, and then you start to ask, well, what about the northern generals or the northern politicians who may not have owned slaves or traded slaves, but the banking system at the time was completely implicated in the slave trade. Same with the textile mills. I mean, so if you were in any position of privilege or power in pre-Civil War America and many other places, you were part of that system too. So we shouldn't have statues for them as well. And I think ultimately the whole idea of making a statue of a person, making a hero, elevating them to this semi-divine status, that is actually a problem. Because you only do that if you think, well, this person is better than others because here are their accomplishments.
Isn't that what we do when people die anyway? We just focus on their intentions. Like, oh, they had the best intentions. We don't focus on any of the shitty stuff.
If you were born into, like, say, the patrician landholding class in Virginia in the late 18th century, there's no way you were not going to have some kind of racist attitudes. It was you were steeped in that.
Right.
So you can't say, well, they were a bad person because they had those attitudes. They were a person of their time. So yeah, this is all related to the punishment mentality that basically holds that people do bad things because they're bad people. And as you were saying, people do bad things out of the circumstances that they're in, which isn't to say that we have no choice. We do reach moments of choice where there's a crystallization of our consciousness. But these moments, most of what we choose is unconscious and automatic. The moments of true choice are special moments when something is crystallized into our attention that had not been there before. Anyway, what goes for bad people goes for good people also. People do brave things and heroic things also from their circumstances. So like, even, you might admire somebody like Thomas Jefferson or someone less controversial. How about John Brown? If there's any white man who might be okay to admire in our current political climate, it would be John Brown, who forfeited his life to try to free the slaves by violence. And so you want to revere him. But if you ask, okay, well, what made John Brown into John Brown? Was it him, this separate individual who somehow mustered the moral fortitude to make a better choice than other people because he's made of better stuff? Or was it the convergence of his circumstances that gave birth to who he was. So basically so this is getting, again, like, just, it gets, again, kind of theoretical, but the whole idea of making statues and heroes of somebody, it devalues all of the people doing the humble work that never get a statue made for them, never get celebrated, but who are part of creating the conditions for the heroic appearing people to do what they do. So someone is courageous and altruistic. Is that because of them? Or is that because of how their grandmother loved them and the strong community that they were in and the mentor that took them under their wing at a certain time of their lives and the love that they received? Like, those are the people maybe who should get more credit. And that's why, you know, I was supposed to be awarded this prize. I don't remember what it was, but, you know, it was this thing where you go and you make a speech and they give you this prize, you know, and a check. And I was like, I just felt really uncomfortable with that, you know, because anything that I've accomplished, I've done as an instrument of, even like on an intellectual level, like an instrument of a field of consciousness that millions of people participate in. And my good fortune that allows me to do this is because of the love that generations of, you know, mothers have given to their children, and that love gets passed on. And you know, my teacher in first grade, Gary McCaslin, his name was, and he was so kind to me in that bewildering, alienating school building. And if it weren't for him, you know, maybe my narcissistic tendencies would, you know, be much more in control right now if it weren't for him and these other beautiful humans. So it's not that, like, you know, modest and denying my gifts. It's that I'm just recognizing the reality that I am not a separate being. And so this is, you can see how this translates to the matter of statues. The problem actually on a fundamental level isn't that we have the wrong statues up. It's the whole mentality that puts statues up to begin with.
Right. And I see all of that, and I agree with all of that. I think still, you know, I empathize that as a Jewish person wouldn't want to walk past a statue of Hitler with all of the history and the pain that their family has experienced. I can see why a person of color wouldn't want to walk past a statue of, you know, Robert E. Lee at their school every day, things like that.
Can I just say, it also depends on how that statue is held. You know, if the statue becomes a way to unfold stories and history, it might be good to have a statue of Robert E. Lee there. Otherwise, you're kind of erasing that history. It might be good to have the statue there, but instead of, you know, just glorifying that he was a brilliant general, you know, you tell the whole story.
Yeah. That's my piece of this is my argument is that when we're trying to erase history, like, I don't know if it was Iran, somewhere where there's pyramids, not Egypt, but somewhere where there's some of the most ancient things that we know humans have made on this planet, right? They were being destroyed because of an uprisal there, and the world is going, oh my God, how are you destroying these ancient artifacts? The guys there, like, this is the history of our time, and the history of our time holds this idea of whether it be a monarchy or something that no longer serves the people at this point. And that's why they're having this uprisal. In any case, when we're talking about statues of any type or monuments of any type, it represents something in our history, which is important to have a memory of the history. But I think the thing that we dismiss when we decide to just knock it down is the ability to now consciously clarify what the history actually was. If we had left out some of the shit, because like I said, when people die, we just focus on their good intention stuff. Like, what did they do that was good that we can talk about now, when we dismiss the other stuff? But if we view it as a whole piece of history, like, this is who this person was and this was their conditionings, and it doesn't mean that they're necessarily, you know, a terrible person or a hero, but this is what they did. And this is how we got to where we are now. This is the progress. History is important for that reason. Then we get to a place of clarity, which is, again, what I think we're looking for in the midst of all the confusion. So I don't know. I don't think there's a right answer to should we rip these statues out or not, but I do think that there is an argument to how do we preserve our history.
I think there is an argument, you know, to tearing down the statues, simply because the statues are part of the maintenance of a certain narrative of history that minimizes or obscures a lot of the suffering that happened of the slaves, you know, of people of color. And you know, by elevating these figures, you're constructing a certain narrative, and so I can understand why we might want to erect different statues,
or just put them at ground level with us,
right? But I just think that you know, like, as I was saying before, it's such a magnet for seeming to do something and take action that actually doesn't really change the causes of inequality and
It
poverty.
might hinder it. It might even hinder it.
Right. It kind of vents that energy, makes you feel like you're doing something virtuous. But have you really changed conditions?
Right.
You know, for the minimum wage worker in the Dunkin' Donuts, you know? So
yeah. I think if we did have the ability to go, these were humans, they were imperfect, and we could collectively look at it that way, then we're creating the paradigm shift that I think we're talking about here today, which is that interbeingness, you know, allowing ourselves to have come from a place that we can now see, you know, with hindsight was not a good idea. And now we can decide to change it with some conscious effort and integrity. So
let's talk about the conspiracy.
Yeah. So conspiracy that you bring up in your essay, and I think you touched on it a little bit earlier, Charles, that conspiracy theories tap into an unconscious orthodoxy, the war against the other. So can you go into what the conspiracy myth is? I think a lot of people are going to have some mixed feelings about all that.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned it a little bit before, like to take a complicated systemic structural problem and blame it on a group of evil people. That is the same pattern as any kind of reductionism. You know, it's the same pattern as reducing climate change to just a matter of carbon dioxide, or a disease to a matter of a virus or a bacteria, not asking what is the terrain that allows this bacteria to take hold in your body to begin with, when there are bacteria and viruses everywhere. Like, why this person? Why now? Why you? It's the same mentality that blames poor harvests on weeds. You know, here's this thing that we can uproot and the problem is solved. So it's a distraction from the bewildering and uncertain kinds of change that involve ourselves and our own participation. Much easier to blame some group. Not to say that there aren't conspiracies. What I'm saying is true whether or not there are actual conspiracies. I'm just pointing to a tendency that might cause us to look for them, and because it is kind of a comfort zone, to short circuit our marination in uncertainty by pinning it all on, oh, now I understand, here's what's happening. This totalizing explanation for the way that the world works. It short circuits our foray into the territory of the unknown. Chaos. Oh, I know. Here's the explanation for everything. Not that there aren't conspiracies, you know,
right.
Like, I mean, some of them are uncontroversial, like the Iraq weapons of mass destruction conspiracy. There were no such thing, and everybody knew it, and they pretended, like in the media, in the government, right? That's well documented. Iran-Contra, blatant conspiracy, not controversial, at least among left people. Enron, COINTELPRO, the FBI's infiltration of the civil rights movement and the environmental movement, et cetera, et cetera. And I would, I would venture into more controversial territory, but I would say I think the Kennedy assassinations both were conspiracies. And then you go a little farther into like 9/11 and stuff, and it becomes more murky. People who investigate those become very convinced of that. And I'm not, in the essay, I was not saying conspiracy theories are false. And I was not saying that they are true. I'm saying that they are vehicles of truth.
Right.
And the truth may not be literal. They are myths. And the truth of a myth does not depend on its literal, factual truth. It may or may not be true, but you can feel the truth of a myth, such as in many cultures, it is believed that the world rests on the back of a turtle. Can you feel that there's a truth there? Like, for me, on a deep psychological level, I'm like, yeah, that's true. And if somebody, shows me a picture of the earth and look, no turtle, and what would the turtle stand on, and like all these things, that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. So I in that essay, I wrote an essay called The Conspiracy Myth and investigated what truths are the conspiracy theories expressing. And one of them is, there's a lot we're not being told. That's true. Another is, there is an evil or an inhuman power in control of the world, pulling the strings. Now, I think that inhuman power is, something like capitalism or patriarchy or white supremacy, not an evil cabal of plotters. But still, that's a truth. It's giving an expression to a truth.
And just the fact that we feel that we need to create any myth because we are in fear of being lied to by, the government or Big Brother.
It's a bad thing. A myth is a good thing. We need myths. Myths are how we give life to truths that would otherwise be inaccessible to us. All cultures had myths. Like we need myths.
Yeah, it's the imagination, it's exploration.
And some of our myths today are decaying and they're no longer valid. Like, the myth of the founding fathers and
Right.
the glorious history of America.
Right.
That's a myth that organized us and conditioned our perceptions of the world. And that myth is decaying.
Right.
And part of the conspiracy phenomenon is for a hunger for a new mythology that we can use to make sense of the world.
Or at least a reformation with clarity of what really, what's true now.
Yeah, I see that part, like the control, but then there's also the fact that a lot of people feel like we've been lied to so much, it's impossible to not be a conspiracy theorist these days, especially when it comes to vaccinations and this virus and the tracking and things like that.
It's so polarizing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how can we not be conspiracy theorists right now?
Yeah. I mean, in a way, I think that conspiracies can happen unconsciously, where I wrote about this in the article too, that even if there's no mastermind, as an emergent phenomenon, people collude or conspire. Like, the journalists kind of know what is forbidden, what is going to advance their career, what is going to receive criticism, even if there's no one giving them orders to to write disparagingly of a vaccine skeptic, a prominent vaccine skeptic. Like they know that if they write approvingly of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., they're going to receive tremendous pressure. They're probably going to get fired. They're going to get deplatformed. And if they write contemptuously of him, then they are seen as respectable and a serious journalist, and like they know that. There doesn't have to be anybody giving them orders to write this and not that.
So how do we ask ourselves to be a maverick in the midst of that, though?
It's scary. And it's always been scary for humans to dissent from consensus reality, to evince opinions that are different from those of your tribe.
Right.
And to espouse values and to violate their norms. This is generally, it's antisocial people, psychopaths who do that. Most people are conformists and it's not a bad thing. They seek harmony. I'm not disparaging the conformists. Like we have evolved for social harmony. That's why we've been so successful compared to, say, Neanderthals, who were smarter than we are. Their brains were, at least according to brain size, were much bigger, 30 or 40% bigger, I think. But they didn't have this kind of social cohesion, at least according to one theory that I find fairly convincing. But we humans, Homo sapiens, it's really important to us to get along. And if that means pretending to believe something that everybody else believes in order not to make waves, like we tend to do it. And that usually serves the village and serves the tribe. It's only in extraordinary times, because usually our norms and values have co-evolved with our environment and with our conditions to serve our well-being. It's only in times of drastic change and disruption that the blessing of our conformity and tendency to harmony becomes a curse. And in those times, it's the shameless people and the mavericks and the dissenters and the rebels who are exercising a necessary function. And I do think that we are in that time today.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, it's hard with the we are one mentality and healing the polarization, which I want us all to strive for. We are one, but so many people feel that their health and human rights is at stake, and everyone's doing one. I keep using vaccinations as an example because it's such a touchy topic, and I feel like it fills my timeline a lot. One mom, she's only vaccinating her kid because she wants her kid to be healthy, and one mom is not vaccinating their kid because they just want their kid to be healthy. So they're both doing what they truly believe is best. And they're so passionate about that. And they feel like the other one is affecting their own human rights because your kid's going to get my kid sick and your kid's going to get my kid sick from vaccination shedding, so.
Or from getting a forced vaccine because, it goes that route.
Yeah.
I do think that in many ways, our society has kind of, our narratives have become divorced from reality and are maintained only with greater and greater denial. Now, I'm not, by any means a scientist or researcher in the topic of vaccines, but I do pay some attention to it because it is like the most polarizing of all topics out there. Like if I wanted to divide my audience in half and be half my audience, all I have to do is come up with one or another announcement about it.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't matter which side and in those situations, I always look for underlying truths and the agreements that both sides share without knowing it and the questions nobody's asking. With vaccines, honestly, like I think that the medical establishment needs to start looking at some of what has been excluded from their worldview. You know, I was just a couple of weeks ago, I was reading a thread, I think it was might have been on Facebook. This Australian celebrity had come out as a vaccine skeptic. And I just, perused the comments sections, and many people basically, naming him as the Antichrist and so forth. But also like hundreds of stories along the lines of, my kid was a precocious, healthy 1-year-old getting into everything, making messes everywhere, very bright and engaged. And then I took him in for his whatever vaccine, and he, screamed all night, and had a fever. And the doctor said it was coincidence, not related. And I believed him. And then I took him in for the next vaccination. And this time the same thing happened. But the next day he stopped making eye contact. And, he's 18 now and stopped talking.
Yeah.
And he's 18 now and he still can't talk.
Yeah.
And,
I have multiple
guy,
friends with the same story. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, and you read some of these sites, you can read thousands and thousands of these stories, and this is, I guess, something where I'm not so much just holding the paradox and looking for the hidden assumptions, but where I think that the blindly pro-vaccine people really should read some of these stories and ask, why am I so sure?
Right.
Because ultimately it comes down to, which authority do you believe? It comes down to belief in authority. Not really. Most people have not done the research themselves or
right.
I had one, I remember a kind of conversation that I've had more than once where they're like, show me one peer-reviewed study that casts doubt on the safety and efficacy of vaccines. And I'll be like, okay, here's a page that has, 200 studies. And they're like, you expect me to read that crap? What journals were those in? Those couldn't be. Because if you already know what's true, then why would you even entertain something that conflicts with what you think is true? It's a waste of time. So this, and I guess, what I want to say is that everybody I know, including myself, has something like that. Something that we are so sure is true, but that is actually a part of our identity complex that we believe not for reasons of evidence and logic, but because that belief has become part of our identity. And it's hard to give those up.
Yeah.
When they're threatened, you feel threatened because it's your identity. Right. When there's some data point that comes in that doesn't fit, you ignore it or you attack it. When something comes in that does fit that belief,
especially if you feel it, you've experienced it. If you feel it was your child that you saw experience it, then it's like you feel like they're actually calling you a liar because they're threatening your own experience.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would even say they're threatening your own existence at least ego existence, where you literally have to experience a death of that identity, like Charles is talking about, in order to let go of it at all, or in order to reform it at all.
Yeah. You talk about this a lot, and so does Tom Schick's book, Life's Operating Manual, but how does our money system create scarcity?
Yeah, I wrote a whole book on that. I won't go too deep into it, but just basically it's because of the way that it's created as interest-bearing debt lent into existence by banks and financial institutions, investors buying bonds, for example. And because it's all created as interest-bearing debt, it means that there's always more debt in existence than there is money, because every creation of money as a loan comes with a debt that's even bigger. So that puts us into competition endemically for not enough money. Like systemically, everybody's competing to pay back these debts, but there's not enough money to pay them back.
Right.
So somebody's going to have to go bankrupt, and we're all competing to be that person. And this radiates out into the economy as, all kinds of competitiveness and scarcity. But that's the core of it. Yeah.
And I love for people who do want to go a bit deeper in that, it's a YouTube video, Sacred Economics. That explains it, I guess, in a concise way too. It's about 12 minutes long. How do you think that the legalization of psychedelics will change our economy and our culture?
I think that it is disruptive. The old, drug warriors, when they said that it would end, legal LSD will end society as we know it, they were kind of right, actually. But I think that's a good thing because it really one thing they do is they open people up to the existence of a much bigger reality than we've been told exists. Right. And this is part of the conspiracy thing too. Like the reality that has been told to us is so much smaller than what is really out there. And psychedelics, as well as contact with indigenous cultures and other cultures, that's what it tells us. It shows us that your secret suspicion that reality and possibility are bigger than you've told, that's true.
Yeah.
You were right. And then it provides, it puts us in a dilemma. At least that's how it was for me. You know, how do I reconcile the world that I'm living in with what I actually know is out there? Do I just ignore it and be a dutiful little citizen and continue acting as if this narrow consensus reality is all that there is, and ignore the vastness of mind and universe that I was shown? And if I don't just exclude it, then how do I integrate that? So I think that as we gain more access to psychedelics, this question comes up more and more, and it loosens the hold of the story of separation on people. You know, the institutions are still there. The economic compulsion to participate in the world destroying machine is still there, but you're not bought into it anymore. And if it crumbles, if it's challenged, if it crumbles, you're not going to try to put it back together again. You'd be like, thank God it collapsed. And if it's challenged, you're not going to try to defend it very hard, or at least part of you won't. Part of you will, because I'm afraid of things falling apart. But part of you is like, yeah, bring it on, because as I have seen through psychedelics, I know that this isn't the right way to live.
Right. Yeah.
Did we cover, I just kind of want to define gift economy for the listeners, and you've put some words to that here, but just to go over what that might look like if we were in a situation where we could have that type of complete renewal of our economy. What would a gift economy look like?
Yeah, that's another big question. You know, it doesn't mean, you know, giving presents, or it doesn't even necessarily mean the end of money, but it's modeled after the way that communities used to work, where people understand the needs and the gifts of those around them and meet those needs without necessarily keeping track, without maintaining an account. But there's kind of like a inexact social account that is kept, where the community recognizes who's been generous and who's been stingy, and takes care of those and is generous to those who are the most generous. So it requires transparency and an ethic of non-accumulation, and it requires having some way to connect gifts and needs and to offer the social validation for these contributions. So in Sacred Economics, I wrote about how can we change money so that it supports that ethic. And also, I do practice it in my work as well. I think you had a question about that as well.
Yeah, our Majic Mob asked how you got to a place where you were able to provide your work and speaking engagements for free. It's something that Tom Shadyac does as well and talks about.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I do it for free. I would say that I do it by gift. So people are free says, I don't want any money.
Right.
Gift says, you're welcome to pay whatever amount feels good, including zero. So I don't compel a return gift, but you know, a lot of people donate through my website, or like online courses, they'll pay a voluntary fee, which is anything they want, whatever feels good and right to them. So it could be zero, you know, and it could be, you know, what you would normally pay for an online course, whatever that is, or something in between, or something bigger. I don't know. But that's the idea. It comes from not wanting to put this material behind a paywall. I mean, the whole reason I'm doing it is so that people will read it or listen to it.
Yeah.
So it's like to do that and then say, but you can't unless you give me money.
Yeah.
Like, that's contrary to my intention. So,
right.
So and if I speak at a conference and stuff, like, and they're paying the speakers, then I'm not going to say, don't pay me, because I understand that as a token of gratitude and of honor. And I want the information that I serve to be honored as well.
Yeah, reciprocity.
Yeah, so it's not like I'm, you know, above it all and, you know, don't like or don't need money, but it's really trying to implement a gift ethos, a gift model, even in the way that I, you know, put my offerings into the world.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing to remind ourselves, I think, to think of how we can do that with our work. But it does also make me, I don't know, have this feeling of, does it only come, it feels like maybe in this culture that I was raised in, feels like, well, you have to be privileged in order to get to that, you know, in order to be at a place where you feel like you can gift things, because we're in a culture that says,
I mean, actually, poor people give a lot more.
Yeah, it's true.
Than wealthy people.
And I don't think you ever really become poor by giving.
Yeah. In you know, impoverished communities, people are sharing a lot more and taking care of each other a lot more. And even statistically, as a percentage of income, the wealthier people are, the less they give.
Yeah. But
So,
and then people use that as an excuse to not give because they're trying to get to be like those people. But Memphis is one of the poorest cities in America, and they're the most charitable.
yeah.
So,
And in other countries, if you go to like other cultures where people are literally dirt poor, as in they don't have a floor in their house, it's dirt, and they have almost nothing, they are so generous.
I know. And it makes me sad because when people hear that, though, they think it almost makes them, I feel like it might encourage stinginess and less giving because they don't want to end up poor. They want to end up wealthy, you know?
The more money people have, usually the more attached they become to that money. So that's
Then there's the conversation about when people get so attached to giving that they literally will give their last dollar and then that's it for them. You know, I mean,
yeah. The question then is, are you giving because you're actually wanting to give, or is it because you want to know yourself as good?
right.
Is it actually
That's
a kind
a
of
good
vanity?
question.
Yeah, I made an online course called Living in the Gift that really goes deep into this,
Oh, I like that.
into that
Good.
psychology. Yeah.
I am, you know, a lot of people are out of work right now. I've been out of work for 3 months, but I still give on the first of every month. It's just a direct deposit to a place in Memphis. It's $100 every first, and it's a rock climbing gym that doesn't charge admission, so kids can come in and get mentored. And I get different like I don't go around telling people that, but the few close people in my life that do know have different reactions. Some find it very irresponsible and some find it very admirable. And if I were to ask myself why I do it, it's because I've been given to in times that it's the only reason why I survived. And these people, even though I'm out of work right now, they need, in my opinion, they need it more than I do. They have less than I do still, even with me being out of work.
And maybe also on some level, you know, you'll be okay. Maybe you're not actually being
It
irrational.
doesn't mean I don't have financial anxiety right now, but I do on a soul level. I know I've always been okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's true.
I need to end soon because I have another one in half an hour and I need to rest in between.
Yeah, no problem.
You want to move to the staples?
Yeah. So there's a few short questions I like to ask everyone who comes on the show. So first off, if you could hug your younger self right now, what would you say?
If I could hug my younger self, that's interesting. I would say you don't have to earn the right to exist.
I need to hear that. How old were you when you were hugging yourself, out of curiosity?
7.
If you could have the whole world read one book, which would it be?
I wouldn't recommend the same book to the whole world.
Yeah.
Yeah. Books can be a kind of medicine and it's specific to the illness.
So whatever calls to you then?
And I wouldn't say that either, but sometimes I recommend books to people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you recommend? We need to know.
It depends on the person, you know. It usually comes up as it's like, oh, you know.
Yeah. This conversation brings it about.
Yeah.
Do you have one that changed your life at like a pivotal time where you're like, this book broke something open for me?
I mean, a few. People's History of the United States. As a teenager, that changed my life. Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism by Chogyam Trungpa. That changed my life when I was 22. Order Out of Chaos is a science book. The Unsettling of America by Wendell Berry. Gulag Archipelago, 1984. That's a few.
Yeah.
Okay.
Those
Thank
are great. You. She's writing them now. If you could whisper one phrase to everyone on the planet, what would it be?
You are not alone.
Before we let you go, where can people find you online?
My website, charleseisenstein.org.
Awesome. Yeah.
We've got
tons
all your
of amazing
essays.
essays. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
I love your essays, even though people I'm sure are reading them looking for answers. What I love is that you encourage them to ask more questions. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Yeah, I really think that what we need most in our time is not more answers. We need to ask different questions.
Better questions. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't even know what questions to ask at this point.
Yeah, I agree. Really quick, I know you've experienced with psychedelics. Have you ever found out what your spirit animal was?
You know, like I've had different experiences where someone, puts me in a trance or whatever, does a shamanic journey or something. I don't do a whole lot of that stuff, actually. I feel like it doesn't work somehow for me.
Oh,
you're already living it.
I had one experience where my spirit animal is a mouse.
Oh.
What did you say?
Isn't that weird?
Jade reads spirit animals, so she probably saw one on you.
A mouse that's so interesting. I know they have a lot of interesting spiritual meanings, but I saw you as a gecko. So
that's cool.
Yeah.
What's a gecko?
Yeah, but you hope it's going to be a bear, or it's like something impressive, and then it's like this mouse, this little quivery.
And then a gecko is really small too.
Gecko.
Okay. It represents rebirth and life cycles, the circling of energy. They also symbolize there's always hope for rebuilding our own lives. They symbolize energy and magic of the nature and the life in the purest form. And then, they're known for, they're able to change.
Chameleon.
So adaptability. And then they shed their skin. So just constant rebirth. And yeah.
When I was in Taiwan, I spent my 20s in Taiwan and was I went to this Taoist meditation center that was on a really powerful earth energy spot. And so, yeah, like I didn't even necessarily believe in that kind of stuff, but it was undeniable. Like
Yeah.
Wow.
that spot. And they had all these mediums there whose abilities were like vastly magnified by being there, and all these interesting practices and stuff. It's a long story, but they said that they had this concept. I'm not sure if it's exactly the same as a spirit animal, but they called it your original spirit. And mine was a parrot.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting too. I know it's different. Spirit animals, they have a message for you in this like time of your life. So it could be for 10 years, it could be for a few years, but yeah, so it's all a little different, but that's so cool that you experienced that.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah,
thank
that'd
you
be a whole
so
other
much.
story, but thank you. Yeah. This is delightful to you all.
Yeah,
thank you, Charles. This
Yeah.
is great.
Have a nice little break before your next one.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, soon. Bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.
All right. Let's do.
That was definitely our deepest dive, I feel like.
You think so?
I think that's the deepest philosophical conversation that this show has seen.
I think it was on part. I think Eric Gotze too.
Gotze is psychological. I mean, he's in psychological.
Yeah, he's a little bit more
studies.
psyche. Yeah, that's true.
All psyche.
Yeah. Well, I definitely am so glad that we got him on, because I know that I'm going to continue to read his work, and you know, it's a cool feeling when you're reading someone's work and you're like, I've gotten to talk to him about this. So
I know.
It was really. I enjoy this podcast for giving us those opportunities.
It's going to keep me, I mean, his whole thing is questions. So I feel like my head is spinning now with questions, which how do you get out of a conversation that's all questions? Think about that.
I know. Well,
it could never end.
I have a question.
Yes.
What's your magic trick?
My magic trick actually comes from the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Oh.
But it's really somehow tied into this conversation because we broached the topic of death a couple times in here, and getting people generally, and myself included, to be more comfortable with thinking about our own death and thinking about death in general, because it could be such a powerful tool if we were better at that. And, you know, we had that episode with the death doula, Alua Arthur, who is so incredibly articulate.
Yeah. I love her.
Yeah.
I want to do a part 2 with her.
I know. I just love her. Like, I just want to sit with her in person and just be good friends and buddies. Yeah. Go out and visit her in Joshua Tree. Anyway, okay. So my magic trick is to imagine your own funeral 3 years from now. That's 3 years is just to give you a little gap in case maybe you have a lot of stuff you want to change when you do this practice. So to imagine your funeral from 3 years from now, and to imagine the whole setting. This is, you know, in your mind's eye, really kind of go into a meditation with this and think about the setting, from the flowers to the casket with you laying in it, all the people who would attend, seeing all their faces there in the audience. And then to imagine that 4 people would be standing up and speaking. So to figure out what 4 people would stand up and speak for you there, and choosing 1 close family member, 1 close friend, someone from your work or someone you work with, and someone from your church or community organization where you've been involved in service. So that's 4 people. Once you have those 4 speakers in mind, then think deeply about what you would like each of these people to say about you and your life. Maybe it's about what kind of wife or husband you've been, what kind of mother or father you would like their words to reflect about you, and what kind of son or daughter or cousin, what kind of friend were you, what kind of working associate you've been or were. So just to really think on what character you would like them to have seen in you, and what contributions and what achievements you'd like them to remember. And look carefully at the people in attendance at your funeral. Think about what difference you would have wanted to have made in their lives. So I was doing this little exercise last night, and it really gave me some perspective and insight into where I'm not showing up, and the way that I'd like to change in some of the areas in my life. So I thought it would be useful for our listeners to give it a go.
Yeah, a few thoughts occurred to me too, just listening to it. So that is a really useful practice. And one of my favorite questions that you ask is always, think from your deathbed head.
Deathbed head, yeah.
Yeah. So my magic trick is very short and simple, but it has to do a lot with what we talked about on this episode. And it's just having the mentality of like, if I were you, I would do as you do. We are one. And Mercedes I feel like was really articulate on that. This is just a one sentence summary for you to use maybe when someone is cutting you off, or when you're struggling with not judging, the homeless person begging, or even with the white supremacist, or, the protester that may have knocked something over,
On your
I don't
lawn.
know. Yeah, anything, anyone, even with your partner who's driving you up the wall today or something, just to put your hand on your heart and in your mind to look at them and in your mind say, I see your essence. So it's like you're choosing to recognize them as God in drag. You're choosing to see the God in them. You're choosing to see their essence. So just consciously taking a step back, putting your hand on your heart, which is like asking yourself to be in your heart and not in your mind, and to just say, I see your essence.
Yeah. And I love that. It actually makes me think of, this is something so simple that probably if you're listening to the show, you already know the definition of namaste. But when someone holds their hands together and says the word namaste, it means